and I've said this before in here, when I'm out doing a convention and teaching in front of a bunch of people and this comes up, I will always ask, and these are geeks, these are fantasy geeks. I'll be like, by show of hands, how many people in the room have started reading Lord of the Rings but never finished? Half the hands go up. So 50% of everyone who's ever bought Lord of the Rings has never finished it. I don't want to write that book.
Welcome to Releasing Your Inner Dragon, the podcast that intersects imagination and narrative. I'm Marie Mullaney, your guide in the world of fantasy creation. Join us as we explore the magic of narrative.
And I'm Maxwell Alexander Drake, and we're here to guide you through the craft of storytelling, bringing you insights and techniques from the vast and varied world of creative writing, and unlock the secrets of the writer's craft.
So, Drake, you have just flipped open a new book, and you read the first paragraph. What is the thing that makes you put the book down and walk out the bookstore?
So I haven't bought it yet, which is good.
No, you haven't even bought it yet.
Because I'd be even more angry if I had paid for this. Well, for me, it is always what you call borrowing future tension. I call it raping future tension. Like, it's terrible. The 12 hours earlier is just the worst. When you start off with an event that's going to happen later, the hero gets killed, and then we're going to go back or whatever. That's you don't see it as much in written as you do in video. For whatever reason, TV tends to just plunder that horrible trope that does nothing. It never works. It never, ever one time works. There's no examples of it being good, except for Breaking Bad, but that's not really, there's no tension that you're borrowing. You're just doing some weird abstract thing that just makes them go, what the crap? Like we talked about with the teddy bear, the burnt teddy bear floating in the pool. You're not borrowing any tension. The problem with it in prose is it takes longer to realize you've been duped. So it's not, you don't get this in the first paragraph. You get like this event happening. You're like, oh, this is interesting. Oh, wow. Okay. Oh, he got shot. And then there's a scene break of, 4 weeks before. Like, oh, but that's like page 7 that you've already gotten to get to that point, to realize that they just did something horrible to you. So it's not necessarily the first paragraph, but that is definitely something that I've read. And when I get to that, I'm done. I will never read that author. I will never read that author again because you have betrayed me. But there are other instances that are a little bit more obvious that are kind of the same thing. The dream sequence where I'm going to dream about my house being on fire and I can't get in and my wife and children in there and they're dying. And oh, look at me. Now you really care about me because I cared about these other people that you don't even have any idea who they are. So I guess the dream sequence would be easier to see on that first paragraph.
Yeah, I have a problem with borrowing tension from the future, but it's related to my larger problem of flashbacks. And I'll tell you and our listeners a thing that a publishing agent once said at a show that I went to, which was, it impacted me in an enormous way. So I hope that this will impact you as well out there. They said, if you need to flash back to your character's past in the first chapter, you have started your story in the wrong place. You should start your story, either the reader doesn't need this information, in which case you need to cut it, or you need to, or the reader really does need this information, and you need to start the story where the flashback starts.
Let me take a side note. Something happened last night in the writer's room. You are brought up often in the writer's room because everyone there is listening to our podcast, so they get me live. But you're kind of the surrogate critiquer. And this one person read a piece, and everyone agreed that there was this old crone that was mentioned, this situation, but it happens on like page 3. And we were like, man, that's the interesting part. That's the thing that that would have kept me reading, as opposed to the first 3 pages that I just kind of had to slog through. And so I came up with an idea of, because it happens basically, she's at this shrine that's hard to get to, and she's been prostrating for days, and that's where it starts. And it actually starts off with something hitting her and waking her kind of out of her trance. That's the first opening line, is she gets hit, and then you're in this shrine and you're way up in the mountains and all this other stuff. And then later you find out that she was in uh soothsayer's hut, and the soothsayer gave her this thing, that what to do, to do what she's trying to accomplish. And so I threw out the idea of, why don't you start with that, like in the moment, like literally be in the hut with the woman and give me that, because that's very interesting, and then transition out of that with having like a piece of ice hit me, and me startled out, and oh yeah, I'm actually on the mountains, everything you heard her telling me to do. Because everything between the hut and getting to the temple doesn't do anything for the story. Plus, it's a short story, it's a novella, so not a lot of time to fill in every single gap. And since she already had the story starting off with a flinch of being hit with something, and that's what gets you into it, which does work, it just didn't work because it wasn't a good enough hook. I was like, that. And then one of the other people go, oh, but wait, Marie would kill you for that. That's starting in a flashback. I'm like, well, yes, sort of, but I'm not going to let you know that it's a flashback. I'm just going to have you in that moment, and then I'm going to skip time and wake you up with her being where the crone. So straight from the horse's mouth, what says you to that little setup? How would that be egregious to you? Would it be egregious to you? Would you be like, oh, I'm out, this is a flashback?
So look, I am an absolute martinet when it comes to flashback. So I would probably be marking that as like, fix this.
But
If I'm critiquing. But
but if it feels more like I just jump forward in time.
if you jump forward in time, that's fine. But if I figure out that it's a flashback later, I'm going to be calling this borrowing tension from the future and be annoyed. You see what I'm saying?
Well,
Like,
so the pushback would be, I'm not borrowing it, I'm just giving you the event that led me here. Nothing that happened in the future.
but then how is that a flashback? So
Well, that's what
just
I
do
mean.
the time jump.
That's
No,
what I
do the
mean. That's
time
what I'm
jump.
trying to find out. They docked me saying that this was a
No,
flashback
no,
because
no.
I'm like, well, kind of, because it does happen
Do
before.
the time jump. The time jump's
Exactly.
fine. So I do the whole thing. Da, 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 I have the encounter with the crone. I walk out of the crone's hut. I stare down the mountain. I'm like, it's gonna be a long trip. I get hit in the face, and then I'm wherever I need to be.
Okay, let's that's not actually what I'm doing. So let's
Okay.
let's expand this a little bit. So I'm in the crone's hut. It happens
Mhm.
now. I talk to the crone, she cackles, she does her prophecy, she tells me that I have to go seek the god's temple on the
Mm.
mountain, that I have to make a special cup, that I have to do this stuff to save my brother. And
Okay.
then something weird happens in the hut that would be my transition. That's what I said. I said something weird happens, and then all of a sudden I get hit in the face. And I look around, and I'm actually on the mountaintop at the temple. The cup is already made, and it's obvious that I've been here for a couple of days, because my knees are cramped because I've been laying prone for 3 days, and I'm starving, and all this other stuff.
Do I have no memory of what happened?
What do you mean?
I mean, do I, the person, the narrator, have I lost my memory?
No, basically, I would spin it. The idea that I had, I was spinning it as she passed out while prostrating on the mountain, and she basically had a dream or a memory of what happened to her that led her here. But the reader doesn't feel
You
that, because I
want to
don't.
do a flashback in a dream sequence.
But I don't start with. It's not like I start you on the mountain and then go back to the crone and then come back to the mountain. When the story opens up, you're just there. You're just in the, just like the story that we read at the last critique, where the main character was just in the tattoo parlor with the crazy magic crone. That's the way I would start it.
Yes, but you are literally starting in a dream sequence and a flashback. And yes, I would absolutely put that book down. 100% I would not read that.
But that's sad, because I really like that idea. I would absolutely do that, because, and here's my
Yeah.
my justification.
Mm.
You never feel like you're in a dream. You never feel like you're in a flashback. I just then skip forward in time to skip the mundane stuff of going from the crone to the mountaintop, and then I just transition by the fact that you're just there and you've been there for a while and something hits you in the face, and that,
But then skip.
huh?
Then actually skip the time. Like, show
Right,
me the crone moment,
right.
skip the time. Like,
I just think
don't
I'm not
don't
attracted to the
make
idea
me
of I'm not attracted to the
flashback
idea of
and
actually
dream.
finishing that chapter.
Yeah.
Because what you're saying is do the crone, finish the scene, actually exit, and then scene break. And then, so what I'm trying to do is this would be a way to do it without a scene break. Scene break would be fine. That's definitely
So I'll tell you what you could do. What I wouldn't find
right, because that's
egregious.
what we're talking about. We're not talking about what
Yeah.
is the right way to do it. We're talking
Yeah.
about what is the right way to do it to not piss Marie off.
Yeah. Yeah. So
Let's
what
be
I
clear with
wouldn't
that.
find egregious is if you did that dream flashback. I'd still be a bit beef, but okay. Let's say you did that dream flashback sequence. Okay. And you woke up on the mountain and everything is done and you have no idea how you got here.
What does
You
that
have
do?
no idea how the cup got made.
What does that do
You're
for me?
like, because at that point, I'm like, okay, so this is what started me on the quest. And now apparently the quest is done and I have no memory. Like, that's interesting.
Except for that has nothing to do with the story, because the story is the gods reject the offering and
Yeah.
try to kill the main character. So if
Yep.
and I do know where the story, because I obviously she read
Yeah.
it, so I know where
Yeah.
it's going. So the problem with not having any memory is it doesn't do anything for the story. Uh,
100%.
I'm just
But that's why I'm like, that's what I'm saying. It doesn't, I mean, if you want to do that, I, I would rather say, like, if the part of the story that's interesting and is the crux of it is the gods rejecting the offer, right? Start there. Then have the dude walk down the mountain and go, I'm going to have to go back to that crone again. She must have lied to me.
so that's what the author did, and the problem is that everything that happens on the there's nothing that happens on the mountaintop that was, oh my god, like you had to read through those 3 pages, and then when you found out that it was some weird crone that made a prophecy from a smoky, you know, seance room, that's when you were like, oh, that's interesting.
Okay, so start with the crone, but start with the crone without the thing on the mountaintop. Start with, like, I stood in front of the old crone's hut with my rejected offering in hand and ready to bash down her door. Immediately, I know it's a rejected offering,
Right,
right?
except for, again, I know what the story is,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
the main character never gets back to the old crone, because not only did the gods reject the offer, but hit the character with a lightning bolt as she was running away and tattooed a map to her back and that sent her on
yeah.
this other quest.
So you can
So
do all of that stuff without ever needing the flashback to the crone.
no, right, right. You're I'm not looking for a solution to not do this.
Yeah,
That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about, and we're really on, because literally I still love that way. I would absolutely do that. Even with you saying it would make me mad, I don't
yeah.
think it would. I think if you read it, you wouldn't even notice it. You would go from the now of being in the the crone's hut, to the now of being on the mountains, and you would
I'll
know that I
I'll
just
tell you.
skipped everything in between because you didn't need to read it.
So I'll tell you why it would. So it depends on how you do it. If you do it like a continuous sequence, and we go from the crone's hut to, like, the journey took days, that's fine. Like, cover that
And
journey for me.
that's heavy-handed, and I'm trying to avoid that, or I would be trying to avoid that.
Yeah, you can do things with that, but I just personally, if you just go from the crone to me waking up with my offering in hand on the mountaintop, I'm going to be like, okay, but now not only have you dreamed me, not only have you flashbacked me, but you have set me up with a false premise,
Only
because you
because we're
set
talking
me
about it.
up.
I still
No,
stand by the fact that you wouldn't
you've
even notice it.
literally set me up and said, I must go do this thing. You've set up the quest for me to make these items, blah, blah, blah. And now you've skipped it all.
Yeah,
Like,
I'll never
what was
write
the
it, so we'll never be
point
able to
of this?
prove one way or the other. But I'm
Yeah,
going to stick to the thing that I would write in a way that you wouldn't even notice it. You would know that I skipped a boring part of the story, and you'd be fine with it. You don't.
maybe. I don't think so. I've seen dream and flashback combos,
Again,
and they are
this would
not.
never feel like a dream. The only reason why you think it's a dream is because I'm telling you that it is. You would never see that from the writing, and you would never think
Okay.
there was a flashback because you would think that we just jumped forward in time. Because the way it was in the story, it was a flashback. Because once we got past the offering being rejected by the gods, we flash back to her being pissed about the old crone prophecy
Mm.
being wrong. And that was a flashback.
Yeah.
So, like I said, I think this is just my guess on this. And again, we'll never prove it one way or the other.
Mm.
But because I presented it as a dream and a flashback, that's what you're locked into. I would be willing to bet I could write it in a way that you would never even notice it. And who knows, maybe
So,
we should
uh,
proceed this and
we can absolutely leave it, but I will point out that there'll be people who say, I can absolutely do borrowing from the tension in a way that'll work for you. I mean, it still won't, because borrowing from the tension is an egregious sin. And I feel the same way about dreams and flashbacks. So if you combo them and I
but
pick up
again,
on
it wouldn't feel that way in the story. It would feel like you just skip forward in time.
because when you described it to me, my first words were, it's a dream and a flashback.
That's because I said that. I said
Yeah.
they would be waking
No.
up. So
Anyway,
maybe
it's
I'll
fine.
write it one day and we'll test it out. But
But I wouldn't do it that way.
yeah, no, and that's fine.
Yeah.
I still would. I still like that. And you guys can chime in down below.
Yeah.
Which of you like the idea, which of you hate the idea. But if you're going to chime in, give a reason. Don't just say I like
Yes.
it, I hate it. Say I like it because this would do this, or I hate it because this would do this.
Yeah.
Make you think.
Absolutely. Let us know in the comments what you think. Okay, so those are all dreams, flashbacks, borrowing tension from the future. Those are all kind of fiddling with time and putting your
Knowing where to start the story.
yeah, knowing where to start the story is an important element. The other egregious sin for me is point of view switching in the first chapter. Once you've introduced a couple of point of view characters, I don't mind you switching in a chapter with scene breaks, obviously. But in the first chapter, I want to settle into the character. I
Into a
want to,
character.
yeah, into one character. I want to experience one character's viewpoint. I want to understand them. I want to settle in them. If you make me switch POVs in the first chapter, I don't know. I can't imagine how you would make it work. Maybe if you killed the one POV and the switch is like a gimmick. But
Yeah.
even then, I would recommend not doing
So,
that.
so here's where we see that a lot. We see that a lot when the author starts the story and in the scene are multiple POV characters. Now, yes, they're going to say, I'm only in John's head, but Sally's also a POV character eventually in this story. And so is Tim, and so is Jill. And so you're like, well, they're all here. So let me do John for, a couple pages, then I'll scene break and I'll get into Jill's head for a couple pages. And then that spreading thing, you haven't earned the reader's loyalty to spread out between that many characters, which is why, and I write multi-POV almost exclusively, but I've been racking my brains. Have I ever written a POV story, a multi-POV story where there were two POV characters in the opening scene? And I'm pretty sure I've never done that. I'm pretty sure it's nope. You get this one character, that's your only POV. We're gonna meet the other character later and they're somewhere else, and then I'll bring them together. Because that way it gives you individual time to get used to every individual character on an individual basis, fall in love with them, connect with them, and then we'll give you another one and you can fall in love and connect with them. And then eventually I'll bring them together so that you have them all together.
And generally speaking, I would say every point of view character's introductory chapter should focus only on them.
Yep.
This shouldn't just be the first chapter of your book. It should be, in general, a point of view characters, introductory chapter should focus on them, not spread the love. You
Right.
want the reader to invest in this character. You want the reader to want to follow this character. Stick with the character.
And that's where I think the industry is so wrong in how they're insistent on you must start in a fight scene, you must start in an action scene. Like, no, you must start in a scene that makes the reader care about the character. That could be a fight scene, 100%. But it also could be a breakfast scene, or a bath scene, or a picnic scene. Like, it just depends on what you're doing. The conflict has to be there, the hook has to be there, the whole 9 yards. There has to be something that makes you go, oh, I really like this character. But it doesn't have to be in a exploding combat scene.
I think that this is important to note. Your opening paragraph, your opening page needs to have something interesting about the character or the story or the world that's going to pull the reader in. Like, we critted a piece last episode where there was the Gigons right up front, and the dude hates magic and he's being summoned by mages about magecraft. That was interesting. There was no conflict, there was no action in the scene, but it was interesting, and there was internal conflict inside the character that pulled the reader along.
Yeah, and I talked about, what I mean by an opening conflict. It's not necessarily a conflict. It's dropping an open-ended question that the reader will be compelled to find an answer for. And so with
Exactly.
that one, it was like, oh, there's these weird Jigon monsters that you have to get a protection tattoo or they will actually eat you. What is this world like? What's going on here? And so yeah, there's no fight. There is an interest, though. There's that open-ended question that make me want to, and you want to continue reading it.
Exactly. I mean, you're the one that we just argued over. The central conflict is the gods rejecting the offering, right? That's the thing. But the opening hook could potentially be this crone's prophecy, or it could be the gods rejecting, or something somewhere. That is it's not a fight scene, it's not an action scene, but it is a moment that causes the character conflict inside
Yeah.
themselves or externally, whatever, and it pulls the reader through into.
And unfortunately, that's the esoteric part. And that's what we're saying. What you want is something that pulls the reader to want to read, as opposed to them having to force their way through the read. And
Yes.
and it really is that simple. It is something that makes you go, okay, no, I got to read the next paragraph, or because I just have to. Because now you're being compelled, you're being pulled, something is drawing you through it, as opposed to, you know, Drake woke up and brushed his teeth, and then he went downstairs and had some breakfast. Today, breakfast was a bagel with grape jelly. And he opened his iPad to read the news, and scrolling through the news, he was unimpressed by anything happening in the world. So then he fed his dog. Like, I'm now
And
having to continue reading.
yeah. And
Like,
that is what the industry, I guess, pushes back on, and why they like you have to start with action, whatever, is because when you tell a writer start by introducing the character, they do the introduction of the character without conflict.
so what you just said is a brilliant thing to chase for a second.
Yeah.
I love, and you've said it too, I love to pick on the industry, how stupid they are, because they'll say stuff like that. They're actually not stupid. They're lazy. That's what they are. So, like, when they say only use said in your speech tags, nothing else, just said, don't use anything else. They're stupid. I would just go, well, you're stupid. That there's a million other ways to do that are better than that. But they're not stupid. They're just being lazy, because if they don't say that, then you're going to write, he whispered quietly and he shouted loudly and he said anxiously, and you're just going to throw all these crappy telly ly adverbs in your speech tag. But instead of, taking the time to explain, look, this is how you use speech tags. This is what you don't want to do. This is what you do want to do. They just say, just do it this stupid way. And so it's the same thing with what you just said. They don't want to say, look, don't give me mundane crap that makes me have to slog through it to get to know this character. Give me something that is an open-ended question that makes me want to find out about. It's just easier to go, you know what? Start an explosion. Just start an explosion. That's what you do. Because then you've kind of got the conflict automatically right there and they know it. So it's not that they're stupid, they're lazy.
They are, but it's a laziness born from volume.
Yes, 100%.
Right? Because they get so much crap submitted to them. Agents get so much crap submitted to them that they're just like, generically, I'm just going to reject anything that's like this because they don't want to slog through 3 pages of whispered quietly, shouted loudly, declaimed, and every other synonym for said that you can find in a thesaurus, which I have read and I understand those agents' pain.
Yeah.
I get it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
I
by
mean, because
doing this as a kind of a blanket rule, they get less crap.
because you got to understand, you're just sifting through something to find something to read.
Yeah.
They're shifting through that same crap, trying to find something to make money off of.
Yeah.
Like it's their job. It's not their entertainment. So they are way more sensitive to the garbage that's out there. I mean, us, we're just like, read a couple paragraphs. I won't buy that one. Read a couple. Nah, not gonna buy that one. Read a couple. Oh, look, this one didn't make me puke in the first page. Let me buy it. Unfortunately, I usually will then puke on the third page, but it's just kind of the way it is.
But it's the industry rules. I am not a big proponent of blanket follow the industry rules.
Right.
But I'm also not a proponent of throwing the industry rules out of the window because there is actually a reason why publishers say these things. And once you understand the reason, you can apply the rule correctly.
Yep. All of my teaching stems from the fact that when I first started this journey, because I'm a big why guy, I would hear the industry say, don't do this. And I'd go, but I can see reasons to do that. So why are you? Oh, you're saying don't do that because of this other thing, because this other thing is so egregious. But I could avoid that and still do the thing. Like our argument earlier, I can start us in a flashback dream, and I think I can still pull it off because I know why the flashback doesn't work, and I know why the dream doesn't work. So I can mitigate those problems because I know what their negatives are. And again, I'm not having, you don't need to agree with me, and that's fine. I'm just saying that's the mentality you need to have.
Yeah.
The mentality you need to have is, okay, I understand why they say don't do this stuff, but I feel like I can avoid those things.
So for our viewers, just to explain why I hate the flashback so much, it is because if you have properly hooked me, okay, you've got me interested in the story, and you now go back, you have drained the tension out of the hook. That's the problem. Okay? Yes, I speak about being a martinet about flashbacks, and that's because, man, everybody uses flashbacks way too much, way too often to give me information I really don't need. And as such, I have become like the publishing industry. I'm like, I hate you, don't use them.
And understand why, don't just understand why the publishing industry says stuff, understand why you're doing it. And every single time that you do a flashback is because you think that the reader needs that information. They don't actually need it. They just need the moment. They need to fall into the moment and fall in love with the character at this moment. When you earn that love, then they're going to be like, I wonder what they were like before this. How did they get to here? Because this is now really interesting and I'm really hooked on this. So that's the problem is I've never seen it not be, I'm not saying it can't happen. I've just never seen it not be when they flash back in the first chapter. Every single time it's, you wanted to give me that information. You, the author, loved that piece of your character's history so much that you forced it upon me. I didn't need it. I don't care yet.
And that's the problem, right?
Yeah.
And that's the problem with flashbacks in the first chapter is you are taking me away from the moment of tension. I'm not yet in love with your character. I have barely met your character. You could kill your character in this chapter and I would not care because I am not in love with him.
Or you kill their wife and kids. I don't care about them either.
You can kill their wife. Like, I would go, oh, that's sad, and move on with my life. I have no emotional connection to this character.
Yeah.
But you've given me a little bit of a hook. You've pulled me into your story. I've started reading your story. And then you give me nothing. You flash back to some stupid part of your character's life that you care about and I don't.
Yep. Every time.
That's the problem.
And again, maybe there's some examples out there that it doesn't fit into that. I just haven't seen. I don't think you have either.
Yeah. And 90% of the time, people do this with flashbacks, especially in the first chapter. Don't flashback in the first chapter. You might think you can pull it off, and maybe you can. Maybe you can, to be fair. But the chances of you pulling it off are really small because it's the first chapter and you have no loyalty in the reader. They literally just have the tiniest of hooks right now.
Yeah.
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 So.
Yeah. I mean, the last thing, because we've kind of jumped around a little bit on our list, really the last thing, and it ties into it, because we talked about too much backstory. That's what you're doing. You're just giving more, like, I need to connect with the character now.
Yeah.
The other big egregious thing, which is most fantasy books from the 70s and 80s, is the first 3 chapters being an encyclopedic history of your world. In the days of old, King Theoden came down with the scrolls of Alderac, and on those scrolls were written, like, I don't care. I'm not here for a history lesson. Now, the problem is that all that is important to the story. We need to know about King Theoden and the scrolls of Elderock and what's written on them, but not yet. I
Not
don't
now.
care. And so many fantasy people, even to this day, still fall into that. They fall into that trap. And the biggest excuse that I hear from people, and I do not understand this excuse at all, is they'll like, oh, because I'll read something of theirs and I say, this is never going to sell. And they're like, of course it will. It's written exactly like Lord of the Rings. I'm like, Lord of the Rings is successful because it was the first. So if you want to sell this, you need to travel back to 1953, the year before Lord of the Rings was published, and then you'll be successful with this. Because no one would ever buy Lord of the Rings today. No one, not a single person. And like one of the funniest tests that the industry ever did, and this was about 20 years ago now, they actually took the 10 most long-lived stories of all times, and they just changed the window dressing on them. They left the writing exactly the same. And I don't remember which stories they were, but like Gone with the Wind or Lord of the Rings or whatever. And they submitted them to like 30 big publishers back before we just had the big 5 or whatever we're down to now. We actually had a bunch of publishers. Every one were 100% rejected by every publisher across the board. So you can't, yeah, I don't care that Lord of the Rings was written that way, and I don't care that Lord of the Rings is so successful. No, I mean, and I've said this before in here, when I'm out doing a convention and teaching in front of a bunch of people and this comes up, I will always ask, and these are geeks, these are fantasy geeks. I'll be like, by show of hands, how many people in the room have started reading Lord of the Rings but never finished? Half the hands go up. So 50% of everyone who's ever bought Lord of the Rings has never finished it. I don't want to write that book.
So let me just talk about change briefly. The dictionaries have updated this year to include literally as meaning not literally but figuratively literally as well as literally. Right? Because because the language, the English language now we all use literally that way now. It makes no sense to not have it in the dictionary that way. The language has shifted, which a language must do unless it's going to die like Latin.
Yeah.
So it is important that things change. But this also applies to writing styles. Okay. Free and direct discourse, which we talk about a lot, right? It's a very common, very strong third person limited POV. But it was invented by Jane Austen in the 1860s, whenever she wrote Pride and Prejudice. I don't know off the top of my head, I can't remember exactly when she wrote, but it was like not the 19, it was the 18s. Okay. And she invented it as a style.
I'm not going to say
Okay, and
invented. I would rather say popularized. She was the first one to really kind of to take
well,
advantage of it.
she was the first one to write in that
Right,
specific free and indirect style.
right.
Right. And it is actually because she was not as educated as her male counterparts, and they were all writing in omniscient, da da da. And she wrote in this more accessible style, right? But Jane Austen's free and indirect discourse is not what we write today as free and indirect discourse, because she was still very omniscient, because the trend at the time was to write all stories in an omniscient fashion. Now, yes, you can say stories are immortal and da 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 da. You can go through all of that spiel. But let me tell you something, you are writing for today's audience. And today's audience are not that keen on omniscient. Because if they were, Lord of the Rings would still be popular and everybody would be finishing
So
it.
it's still popular and they're still selling different copies of them, but they're still
Yes.
selling them to people that just don't read them. So it's like, ooh, that's a really cool leather bound version of this. I want it for my collection.
Yeah.
Because I have a friend who does it. He's actually never finished Lord of the Rings. I think he's got 6 different printing versions of Lord of the Rings, and they're all like leather bound $100 volumes. He's like, yeah, but they just look so good sitting on the shelf. And it's
I'll
Lord of
give
the
you a
Rings, so
different
it makes me feel good that everyone thinks that, I'm that level of fantasy geek that I've, got 6 versions of this, amazing fantasy story that I can't read because it's terrible. I've
I'll give
read.
you a different example. Bram Stoker's Dracula. Like, have you finished it? Have you read it? I've read it, but I also read War and Peace because,
So
um,
I don't even think I own a copy of it.
yeah, and
So
it's not a book that sells well because it's not as famous, as much of a collector's item as Tolkien,
yeah,
right? And of course, it is in the public domain now, so anybody can publish it.
right. Yeah.
Um,
I mean,
but
I watched the Keanu Reeves version of the movie. That was really good.
so I actually really enjoyed Bram Stoker's Dracula as a book, but it is written in a very 18th century style. Now, I've also read all of Jane Austen's books, but I grew up in a literary household. So, you know,
Yeah,
um,
I did not, and I did
my
not.
mother read me Shakespeare in the Cradle,
Yeah.
So, but yeah, so my point is, around all of this is write for your current day audience, not for an audience that existed 50 years ago.
Yeah.
And that means don't info dump. Now, you obviously you do need to give people the information that they need in the first chapter. Okay, so let's say you're like, the Grumpkin has been stolen. And then you can, in the narration, just say the Grumpkin guaranteed the unity
Prosperity.
of the kingdoms. And without it, we have 5 days before the kingdoms fall apart. Something to give the magnitude of the problem. But you don't have to go into the history of the Grumpkin, why it guarantees the unity of the kingdoms, what happened. None of that's important. All that we need to do is we need to understand enough of the world to grasp the stakes of
We
the,
talked about this in the last podcast where we were editing a submission.
yeah.
And by the way, if you would like to put your piece up on the altar of sacrifice, releasingyourinnerdragon at gmail.com. If you want to send us 500 to 1,000 words, we're rarely going to read more than 500 words because in 500 words we can have an entire hour of stuff to talk about. But if you want to send us something, we do episodes every now and again where we edit stuff. Go ahead.
Also, we are pushing to do an episode where we read first pages and we pretend to be publishers. So we're like, okay, we would reject this piece because of, and then we'll give the reasons for it. So if you want to just send us your first page as a submission to the first page submission competition, same email address, and send it to us, and we will do a live read of those when we
And
have about 10.
all the links are below.
Yeah.
So we talked about it there, where it's if the vast majority, the reason why it's so important to show versus tell and to be immersive and to include all, now I've expanded to 7 senses. So I've got the 5 physical senses: sight, taste, touch, sound, and smell. And then I've kind of broken the two. Yeah, I've got internal emotional and then internal physical.
Mm,
So like, shuddering or pain or whatever, but then we've got the emotional side of, hate and love and all of that stuff. If you're doing that, if you've included at least 4 of those 7 things on every page and you've got all, most of your stuff is showy, when you throw in that one line of, where the character's like, his heart dropped to his feet, thinking of the catastrophe that would happen now that the Grumpkin had been stolen. The Grumpkin was the only thing that kept the kingdoms together. Like that little piece of information is definitely info dump, but it's
yep.
one line in a page of personal, emotional, gripping, showy writing. And no one, I mean, we say this all the time. Creative writing is not about following every single rule, because creative is the first word of creative writing. It's about doing it in ways that nobody notices. So when you drop in that one line of info dump world building narrative that isn't really in the character's voice and isn't really personal to the character, it's just something the reader has to know to understand the concept, but it's one line. No one hits that line and goes, oh, this guy's such a crappy telly writer. Look at all this info dumping in these 7 words that are on this 400 word page. Like, no one gonna do that. And they have to have that information. And some information, we are still in prose. There are just some things that you can't beautifully, magically do organically across the board. And actually, I guess I should say, I'm not smart enough to do it. Maybe someone out there is smart enough to do it. But again, it doesn't matter that I'm not smart enough to do it. No one will flinch over that one
I
line of thing.
I also do want to say, like, not everything can or even should be shown. Because if you show literally everything, if you go and you show the Grumpkin and all of that, and like, what you're going to end up with is a bloated, glitter-filled story that is just going to read, it's going to read worse than Lord of the Rings. It's going to read everywhere without any focus and story.
Yeah.
Absolutely, there is a place for telling, but keep it short and keep it relevant. Don't give me the whole history of the Grumpkin. Just give me what I need to understand the stakes, especially in your first chapter.
Because like with this magical Grumpkin,
Hmm.
if we just say, oh, his soul broke realizing the Grumpkin had been stolen, and then move on, we're like,
But why?
why? What is a Grumpkin? What?
Yeah.
So adding those 6 or 7 words of the Grumpkin was the only thing that kept peace within the kingdoms. We don't even need to go further than that. We need to go, without it, blood would be spilt and, mass death. If you just say it's the only thing keeping the peace, I can infer that it means death and bad stuff and all of that. What we don't need is then the Grumpin was created by 3 kings 5,000 years ago in the lands of, Vishnu, by the shamans of, none of that. Maybe all of that is very important. Maybe we can't solve the solution without knowing all of that history. But we're not even to the solution yet. We're not even talking about the solution yet. We are here in this moment. And so we need to live in this moment. We need to have what we need right now. And that's why, like in the writer's room, one of the number one things that I do when I'm editing is like, this information isn't needed right now. This is information isn't needed right now. This isn't information isn't needed right now. So like on this case, maybe they write the Grumpy was the only thing keeping peace within the 9 kingdoms. Great. But the next line is, without it, blood would be spilled and millions would die. I would circle that. Like, I don't need that right now. Like, you've already given me what I need. Let's stay in the moment. Let's keep falling in love with this character. All this other stuff can be given to me later. And again, it comes down to what I said earlier. You think it's important and you want to give it to the reader because you know the whole story. But you have to look at it from, what does my reader know right now? They don't know any of this stuff and they don't really care yet. And so I need to earn their
And
concern.
I'll tell you something else. They won't remember it either.
Yeah. That's
Because it's the
interesting.
first chapter. it doesn't, at this point, the Grumpkin is a name, the character is a name, and that's it. Like, you lash me with more names and fantasy terms and fantasy history, and I'm like, okay, but what if this is important? Like, get me to the story. You know what I mean? Later, when I'm invested in the world, I'm invested in the character, I'm living for the character, I'm rooting for them to succeed, then I'm going to remember the Grumpkin's history. It's going to matter to me.
Yeah.
But right now, it's my first introduction, and I don't know if I'm going to invest enough care to remember your history.
And if you spread me too thin, I definitely won't.
Exactly.
And that's the reason why when everybody says, "Hey, would you read my prologue and tell me if you think it works or not?" I go, "Oh, I only need one word. Does it say prologue at the top? It doesn't work." Um, and it's, you look at like Wheel of Time. The prologue to Wheel of Time is, the dragon reborn, and it's a wonderful scene. You got this character that has no memory. He's walking over the corpse of his dead wife, that he murdered and has no memory of, and he's calling for her to come out and make drinks for their guest, who's actually his enemy. Like, it's a really interesting scene. But it was the third book of that series where I'm reading along and I'm going, something's tickling. I feel like something, was there something? And then finally, about halfway through book 3, I go, oh, wait a minute, the prologue of book 1. And I go back and I read it and I'm like, oh, this actually matters now. This actually now makes sense. But without the first 2.5 books of information, the prologue meant nothing to me. And so, since it never had anything to do with the story, I had forgotten about it. We're talking about the first time. Obviously, I've read it several times, and now I know the story probably in too much detail. But that first time reading it, it was just tickling the back of my brain in book 3. So
So just
knowing
on the
that,
principle of you can make things work, like my prologue is an immediate relevance to the story, and you find the relevance in chapter 1. The reason why I have a prologue is because I kill the character. As I kill the character because it's a villain action.
right?
Like,
Yeah, yeah. I feel the same way about prologues you feel about flashbacks. You just do the
yep.
blanket statement of you can never do it right. Don't do it at all. Um, so it is.
we both have our foibles.
We do. Um, I mean, my award-winning children's movie script, which you can get on Amazon now, Snurse, A Magical Magic Fairy Tale, starts in a dream. And it starts in a dream. Like, it doesn't even, I don't hide it. I don't, even try. And it works beautifully. Because movies are a completely different medium. And so, again, it's won awards all over the world. And I just sold it a third time. So we'll see if it actually crosses the finish line this time. I'd love to see that movie actually get made. It's one of my favorite stories. But anyway, so yeah, you can break these rules, you can bend these rules, but everybody has their pet peeves that were like, don't ever do it at all. I don't care how breathless you think you can do it. You can't. And then, of course, maybe you can. Maybe we're wrong. We're humans. But yeah, that's me with prologues. I'm just nope. Prologues don't work. If it says the word prologue at the top of your opening chapter, you have already failed. I guess I should have added that to the list. If I open the book and the first chapter says prologue at the top, I immediately close it and put it back on the shelf. Like, I'm done. I'm out. And
Yeah.
you want to know probably the one thing that burned me the most? Aragorn.
Yeah.
And there's nothing wrong with the prologue. The prologue actually does kind of give the history of the dragon egg and the elves that hit it and everything like that. What really burns me about that is, so I didn't buy Aragorn until probably the third book had came out, because the entire time I'm like, no way a 16-year-old wrote a fantasy book that I'm going to enjoy. Not going to happen. He's 16. It's going to be trite. It's going to have a lot of tropes in it that are just overused. It's going to basically just be a D&D campaign. It's not going to be hugely imaginative or anything like that. So when the third book came out and they've already made a movie out about it and everybody's, still kind of raving about it, I'm in a Barnes and Nobles and I'm like, you know what? It's free. I'm going to just open it. Because this is before Amazon and the look inside and all of that. And so I'm like, I open it up and I read the first couple of pages of the prologue and I'm like, blown away. It's some of the best writing I had ever read in my entire life. And I'm like, I cannot believe a 16-year-old this is amazing. This is
Hmm.
off the charts amazing. So I bought it immediately. I actually bought all three, but all three
Hmm.
books. Like I'm done. Like I only need these couple pages. Everything's gonna be great. And then I go home and I finished the prologue and it was awesome. And then I started reading chapter one. And a paragraph into chapter one, I went, oh, whoever wrote the prologue did not write this book. And it turns out that was the case. It was a bunch of editors who got together and collectively wrote the prologue to be the massive hook. And then now Pantalone, or Christopher Pantalone, however you say his name, I think he's actually become a really good writer. And actually for 16, he was a way better writer at 16 than I ever was at 16. Um, so it's not terrible. And he does grow into it. But Aragon is exactly what I thought it was going to be. It was very cliche, very trite, pretty much just a D&D campaign.
It wasn't the D&D campaign, it was Star Wars with dragons.
Okay, I'll give you that too. It was still exactly what
I've
you would think
played
a
good
16-year-old would
D&D campaigns that weren't that derivative. It
write.
was Star Wars with dragons.
Right. But I mean, it's exactly what you would expect from a 16-year-old.
Yeah.
This is an older person's game. You haven't lived in as much life as you need to really write a dynamic story that is engaging and intriguing and all encompassing. So that prologue still haunts me to this very day. I still have nightmares about how it tricked me into, and again, I've read the whole series. The whole series, all four books are great. I love I actually do. I am a fan of Aragon. I'm not a fan of the first book, but he definitely grows into, as he continues on, he gets better and better and better. And so I'm definitely not poo-pooing on Christopher nor his writing abilities. Um,
I did not finish that series.
yeah.
I read the first book because a friend of mine was like, you have to read this. It's brilliant. It's written by a 16-year-old. He's amazing. And the problem is, if you overhype something like that, it's like, I'll give you a different example. A friend of mine who no longer gets to recommend anything to me ever in a million years told me, watch the Twilight movie. You'll enjoy it. It's vampires. It's fantastic. I switched the movie on. I reached the sparkling vampires and my limbs froze in horror. I couldn't even reach for the remote to switch off the clearly not aimed at me story that was forcing its way into my eyeballs. And not only have I never watched any of the other Twilights or read any of the Twilight books, I now no longer listen to that friend's recommendation at all. She's off the ever recommend list. Off. Ever. Never.
So two things. One, um, an opposite of what you said, but two, I actually think you made a mistake with that. So,
Okay.
so when Siskel and Ebert were alive and reviewing movies, I watched them religiously because this is before the internet, before all this stuff. Because 100% they would tell me whether I was going to like the movie or not. If both of them thumbed up the movie, I would hate it. If one of them thumbed up it, and I can't remember which one, but it was a specific one, I would hate it. If the other one thumbed it up, maybe I might like it. If the one thumbed it down and the other, if they both thumbed it down, it was a movie for me every time. So you might still want to get recommendations from this person and just like, how'd you feel about this? And they're like, oh, it was terrible. I hated it. You might actually really like that movie. So I think you made a mistake. I think you just need to flip it on its head. But the funny thing is to go opposite, because expectations really do matter this much. Aragon
Hmm.
did that to me, the movie. So when me and my wife did decide to go see the movie, we were like, this is going to be garbage. This is going to be the worst thing we've ever seen. But it was in like the bin for $4 or whatever. So we just bought it. And we bought it literally just to puke on it and have fun. And at the end of it, we were like, that was actually pretty good. It wasn't bad. Now it was bad. It was. But because we had the worst expectations of it, because we knew it was just going to be absolute dog crap, it way overbeat our expectations. And so we kind of had a good time with it. Both of us. Like it was funny. We both were like, that was actually pretty good. It wasn't. But again, our expectations were so low that it just beat that. And so we felt that we got a good deal out of the environment. It is
Expectations
amazing.
absolutely do matter because yeah, I went into Aragon with like this, expecting freaking George R. R. Martin levels the way my friend was raving. Game of Thrones kind of thing. And a
We had
Game
already
of
read the
Thrones,
series.
it's not.
We had already read the series because both me
Yeah,
and my wife are both readers.
yeah,
But we already knew. And
yeah.
then we were like, and also, God bless him. I love Jeremy Irons to death, but the man cannot pick a script. Like he's an okay actor, but he's a terrible, terrible script picker. Like
I
everything.
respect the number of good movies been in on my one hand. And in those movies, he was brilliant. Like, for example, I loved Man in the Iron Mask. It was fantastic.
Yes.
But
Yeah.
also a book you shouldn't read. It's a terrible book. Dumas cannot end a story. You know how you say like Gaiman can't end a story? Dumas has no clue where to end a story, how to end a story, or what the narrative arc is. None. But regardless,
Yeah.
the movie was great and Irons was fantastic in it.
Yeah. He's actually a good actor. It's just that
Yeah,
he picks the absolute worst role.
he does.
Um, and then you go the opposite with Gary Oldman, who is also an amazing actor, but he's a character actor, but brilliant at picking the right roles. Like
Yeah,
everything that he's in, you're just like, that was awesome. Yeah, I love Jeremy Irons. He just cannot pick a movie. He's just or whatever, if it's his agent or whatever. So
I
yeah,
think he picks the movies that appeal to some sort of inner nerd
I don't know.
inside him.
But that's exactly what we did. We went, okay, Aragon's gonna be a bad movie. Who's in it? Oh, Jeremy Irons. Oh yeah, it's gonna be a horrible movie. Like not because of his acting ability. His acting is fine.
Yeah,
It's just his choices.
yeah.
So, all right, we've gotten off
Ah,
topic, but we're pretty
we
much done.
have.
Um,
So,
I
things
mean,
to avoid unless you are super, super confident that you understand the pitfalls and can do it right.
actually, let me caveat that
Yeah,
because you're right. You need to know the pitfalls and know to avoid them, but it's not you being confident. That has nothing to do with it. You must get 10 people who don't care about you, and at least 8 of them must tell you you actually succeeded. Not
yeah,
you. You can't think you succeeded. Other people have to think you succeeded.
yes.
That's when you know that you've subverted the issue.
And they are your dream sequence, your flashback, your borrowing tension from the future, which is all of the things where you jiggy with time. Do not jiggy with time in your first chapter.
Drop the reader into the moment, have them live the moment, have them connect to the character in the moment, and then you've bought the loyalty to start jiggering and moving and adjusting.
Exactly. Don't POV switch in your first chapter. Don't info dump the history or lore of your world. Don't info dump the character's history. All of these things drain the tension out of the hook. Do give the reader some kind of hook, some kind of conflict. Evoke an open-ended question in the reader's mind that they will go, oh, I want to know the answer to that, and I'll keep reading because of it. And then feed that little flame. Do not drain the tension out of it by dumping them into somebody else's head or info dumping on them.
And for clarity, when we say don't POV shift in your first chapter, we're not talking about POV shifting actually. We're kind of using that term incorrectly. If you POV shift, in other words, if you head hop, you're just a bad writer. Like, and I'm definitely putting your book down because that means you just don't know how to write prose.
Yeah.
We're saying don't scene break and then go into another character's head, another POV character's head. So even though you're doing it correctly, it's too soon. You
Yes.
need to finish a scene and allow the reader to really get to know one character before you force them to get to know a second character or a third character. So that's what we're saying. Um,
Exactly.
POV shifting is fine. It's just that I want to make sure that we were clear because
Yeah.
if you head hop, if every paragraph you're in a different character's head, you just can't write prose. There's
Yeah.
no head hopping in any version of prose that works at all. Maybe if your entire novel, the gimmick is head hopping, I cannot imagine that I could ever make it through that. But if for somehow you figure out a way to use that as a gimmick that's going to really, I mean, breaking the fourth wall is almost impossible to do, but there are some shows that we know that they break the fourth wall and it's a gimmick and it actually improves it makes the show more interesting. House of Cards, Doogie, Hauser, there's some things where we did that. Scrubs. I really loved how he would turn and talk to the audience about different things. But it's a
Dogma, the
gimmick.
movie, was great at
Which,
fourth wall breaks.
which one?
Dogma. It was Alanis Morissette as God. That was Dogma, wasn't it?
Yeah, it's Dogma. I don't.
There's this moment where Matt Damon and his acting buddy, I can't remember, those two made movies together. They turned
Ben Affleck.
that Ben Affleck, that's him. They're talking to each other and they're like, sometimes you're forced by your friends to be in a movie, blah blah blah. And they're like, who
Oh,
would do that? And then they turn and look straight into the camera.
so okay, yes, but that's not what I mean, I'm talking about when you're using it as a gimmick. That's just one, that's a joke.
Yeah.
You just did the one little thing as a joke. So yes, that worked beautifully. But I'm talking about when you use it as a consistent gimmick through
Yeah.
the entire thing. And I don't know why people get mad when we say the word gimmick. When we're like, oh, you're using breaking the fourth wall as a gimmick. We're not saying it as a negative thing. It just means you're using it as a tool that is specific to your story that you're going to use over and over and over again. It's a gimmick. That's what it is. It's not, there's nothing wrong with it.
A gimmick is a trick. It's a trick that you're using,
Yeah.
a specific trick that
Yeah,
you're
it's not
using.
that you're using it wrong, not that it's bad to use it. It's just you're using it. You're using a gimmick. There's nothing. I use gimmicks all the time. Gimmicks are good. So I don't know why people get bent out of shape when they're like, it's not a gimmick. Yes, it is. It's a gimmick. That's what it is. So yeah, I just wanted to kind of bring that in there that we're talking about having too many POVs in the same scene. Even if you're doing it correctly, you haven't given them enough time with the first character to really connect with them on their own before you move into giving them another character that they have to fall in love with. In other words, just like everything we're talking about here, you're giving too much information to the reader too fast. You're spreading them too thin.
You're spreading the reader too thin, and because of that, you are losing the tension you created in the hook.
Yep, 100%.
Feed the tension, not the info dump.
Yep.
And I think that is a good place to end this episode, and we will see you soon for another one.
Bye.
Good day to our esteemed listeners. I'm Marie Mullaney, and it has been a pleasure guiding you through the nuances of writing and world building. If our podcast has enriched your authorial journey in any way, please consider liking and subscribing. Sharing our content with your peers is a powerful way to support our mission and ensure we continue to deliver insightful and valuable episodes. Your engagement is greatly appreciated. If today's topic sparked your interest, then Just in Time Worlds on YouTube is where you should be heading next. It's a channel dedicated to the art of fantasy world building, infused with real-world history and science. As an experienced role player and fantasy author, I bring unique insights that will help you craft more immersive and believable fantasy worlds. From historical tidbits to practical writing advice, Just in Time Worlds is a wealth of knowledge for any fantasy creator or enthusiast. Join us every Tuesday for new and exciting content.
If you are ready to take your writing to the next level and work with a group of highly motivated, dedicated writers who are all working to not only improve their writing, but improve your writing, plus you get to work with me on a weekly basis, then I'll encourage you to check out writersroom.us. This is a website that I have created that I really wish I had 30 years ago. It's everything a writer needs to become a better writer. Not only do we do weekly critique sessions, both from other members as well as me, we have daily writing sessions, I do monthly classes, Q&As, we have activities, I do all sorts of learning exercises, such as I do a quarterly writing prompt contest, and just tons and tons and tons of things. So if you're ready to get serious about your writing and you want to actually finish that novel and have a chance of it being published, then I encourage you to head on over to the Writer's Room and join me there. And as a special promotion for listeners of Releasing Your Inner Dragon, I'll go one step more. If you would like to get 50% off for 3 months, reach out to me. There's a million ways you can do that. You can do it through starvingwriterstudio.com, drakeu.com, any of my social media such as LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, X, whatever. Reach out to me, say that you would like to check out the Writer's Room for 50% off, and I will send you a link that will allow you to do just that. So hopefully you're ready to start getting serious about writing, and I'll see you in the Writer's Room.